Hello, and welcome to The Charge Cycle, an electrifying new podcast on all things fleet electrification. I'm Todd Trauman, I'm the CEO of Emission Control. If you are a procurement manager, a fleet operator, or one of the millions of people tasked with a zero-emission deployment goal, this podcast is for you. We speak with industry experts, funding experts, OEMs, and many others to help you stay ahead of this enormous electrification shift underway. Welcome back to another episode of the Charge Cycle, an electrifying new podcast on all things fleet electrification. I'm Todd Trauman. I'm the CEO of Emission Control, riding co-pilot here today with Connor Whaley, our head of strategic partnerships. Connor, how you doing?
Hello. Good to be back.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
If you're listening, it's not your Friday. Friday is right around the corner for you. Really excited. Special guest today. We have Shankar. He's the general manager of Moretensen. You may be familiar with Mortenson if you're in the build industry, electrification industry already. They're an enormous company. They're a top 25 builder. They've got offices all over the country. I'm very excited to have you here, general manager. Again, Shankar, welcome to the Charge Cycle.
Oh, thanks, Todd. Thanks, Connor. Happy Black Friday Eve and happy Thanksgiving as well. Yeah.
Priorities. Well, first things first, obviously we want to get a little bit more context around Mortenson generally about the classic business, just to set some context around what the company does broadly. Obviously, you guys are diving headlong into electrification efforts, doing a lot of build strategy on electrification and that. But we'd love to just hear a little bit about you. Who are you? Where'd you come from? How'd you end up doing what you do here today?
Yeah, no, thank you, Todd and Connor. Shankar, originally from Chennai. It's a southeastern city by the Indian Ocean in India. My whole career has been a bunch of accidents, actually. Originally an electrical engineer because everybody else in my class in high school wanted to be an engineer. So I'm like, why not? And then I was like, I could do better by being in biomedical engineering research. So I came over to Texas A&M and did that. And then I'm like, kind of realized 2 years in, I was not a great engineer. So I got out of it with a master's degree. And then I was always been a food fanatic and also a sports fanatic, along with wanting to be in the business side of things. I've always had the inner entrepreneur in me. I really want to hang out on the technical realm. So did worked in the CPG industry for a little bit, and then I worked in a material science manufacturing company for 6 years prior to Mortenson. So I was in corporate strategy, M&A, ran 3 different businesses and their sales groups and marketing groups across the world. And then 4 years ago, I joined Mortenson. They were looking for somebody to lead their business development in their sports group. So Mortenson does a lot of sports buildings and arenas. And they wanted somebody who did not have any construction background and who was pretty strategic and who had a consultative selling skill set and was building up their own analytics group. So I was like, hey, this is kind of a unicorn group of skill sets. And I saw sports. I'm like, okay, I'm going to interview. It don't matter what the job was. So that there you go on how the heck I joined Mortenson.
Yeah, I would say that's quite the circuitous route, I think, to the
Yes.
end position that you're currently in. I think well-rounded fits the job description quite nicely. So you mentioned a little bit, just you're on your team, a team. Can you describe what that team is and what your inherent focus area is?
Yeah, our group is called the EV and Microgrid Infrastructure Group. A few years ago, we started on the path that we want to be in renewable microgrids because we thought there are a lot of industries which needed resiliency. But what we actually recognized was people didn't really want to pay for resiliency through renewables. Hey, I could just put a diesel genset if I lost power, which was already fairly a bit of a rarity for power losses in a facility in America. So we pivoted when we saw the EV market going bigger, and what we saw the writing on the wall was the projects were getting larger and larger because the rate of charging started getting faster. People wanted to mimic how diesel or gasoline was pumped into vehicles. And then on top of that, the vehicle battery capacity got bigger, so the charger capacity got bigger. And as you all know, utilities, as awesome as they are, it is going to be really, really hard to come in and deliver power in a fragmented way for all these Class 8 semis and public transit buses and so forth. So Our group is really a group of microgrid experts and EV experts. The business model, the business growth is based on we are building microgrid projects with the growth rate driven by the EV market, if that makes sense.
So knowing the size of Mortenson, sounds like those are pretty in-depth projects that are going on at any given time. Lots of DERs being included in these particular projects. So are you guys
Yes.
working on pretty large-scale projects at this point? I'm thinking transit agencies, large fleets. What's a typical project look like these days?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. We don't have a typical project. We do have some archetypes on what these projects could look like. We have a group of projects we have in the planning stages are as simple as 20, 30 fast chargers or two fast chargers and 90 level two chargers.
Hmm.
Because some of these for transits, for example, their use cases could be just being used during the day and nothing gets done during the night, so you can just charge overnight. And then the other extreme is, we do have transit agencies who are looking to electrify all at once, 75 to 100 buses at a time. And because most of the time they may need to charge at the same time, and they also need to be heavily, heavily resilient, they are looking to put in 2, 3, 5 megawatts of solar panel structures. On top of that, they want battery storage to avoid demand charges. And then hold on a second, they may also want a genset just from a perspective of not having to go out completely. What if the sun doesn't shine? And what if the utility is actually cleaned out in case of a hurricane or something? So we have both the extremes, right? We between $2 million to $50 million jobs. But I would say most of what we are finding most recently is given some of the utilities demand charge holidays and some of these developers becoming super smart and finding locations with power, we are finding projects where there are enough DC fast chargers, probably 30 to 40 at a single site with 3 to 5 megawatt load that'll be required.
It's interesting that you have so many different kinds of projects going on right now, where you have solar canopies, but then you have projects that go from 2 million to 50 million. I'm interested to kind of get your opinion on how complicated some of those larger projects are, because a $2 million project is probably going to be significantly different than a one that you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of buses. Is the complexity of that project, both managing, constructing, and actually maintaining them, does that complexity get significantly larger as the project gets larger, or is it, a lot of the smaller projects, they're just as complicated as the larger ones? How are you kind of seeing, the difficulty of implementing all these different projects of all these different sizes and scales?
Yeah, it's a great question, Connor. It depends. I will say there is always a fixed amount of complexity, no matter what the size of the projects are, that actually drives how we choose the projects. I mean, one thing we are very, very conscious about is as a private company, we don't have crazy goals that are unattainable. We want to fit within the culture of what we've already built. We want to chase customers rather than projects. So our goal behind chasing these $2 million projects and actually winning them and doing the work is less about wanting to do those. It's more about we want to make sure our customers have a good experience, consistent experience. They don't have to go somewhere else to get this done. We will be upfront, of course, on saying, hey, this is probably not something you may need Mortenson for. We are just going to overcomplicate it.
Mm.
But in terms of the coming back to the question you asked, Connor, there is the minimum level of complexity in terms of just thinking about what the AHJ permitting requirements are going to look like, what the utility interconnection rules are going to look like, just the mobilization and demobilization, all the upfront due diligence, all the ALTA surveys and the geotechs and whatnot you need to get done upfront. In terms of the actual projects themselves, generally these are fairly simple. The smaller projects are generally simple. You're digging, you're putting in a trench, in sometimes you can actually avoid those just above ground raceways and so forth. Many of them are fairly straightforward. The larger ones, it depends on how much of a green field of a project it is. We've seen projects where everything is being built at once, in which scenario it could be pretty cool where we are putting in a canopy where you don't have to worry about a bunch of other vehicles coming in. The project we did last year, it's not a $50 million project. The Brookville bus depot, microgrid bus depot for Montgomery County. We worked for Alpha Structure. That project was, I may be off by a number or two. That bus depot had a little under 150 buses that were as part of the 7.5 acre facility. And they basically said, look, there are 5 extra parking spots. Go build this 2 megawatt solar, 1.5 megawatt, 3 megawatt hour battery storage, and then the 2 megawatt gen sets, and then 75 plus charger installation in this bus depot. So that complexity was, part of it was civil, part of it was electrical, part of it was phasing, part of it was coordination with 3 different groups within the county. So I think there's a lot of coordination that happens. So the complexity could be in different ways. I will say in a microgrid project, they also heavily indexed to the problems heavily indexed towards the later stage commissioning. You're not only thinking about commissioning 3, 4 individual assets, they all need to speak to each other and work together, which is really, really, really hard to figure out, and then also power the chargers. But yeah, the larger projects, because they are all microgrid projects, in a way, they've all gotten pretty complex.
I want to kind of ask a question about motive here too. So, meaning, we hear a lot about utilities and interconnection taking forever and all sorts of other just bottlenecks associated with the utility, and therefore, a whole industry around microgrids popping up to really resolve that. But is that really the only motive here? What is the driving motive for entities that are looking to deploy a microgrid based solution in lieu of not doing so? Is it explicitly because they're like, we aren't confident that the utility will be there, or that it's going to take forever, therefore? Or is there other inherent benefits for deploying one?
It's yes, and I think Todd, everything that you said are true. The timing aspect of it, and sometimes you may never get the power permanently. The queue, you're just going to be waiting forever. And the third benefit I would say is also the resiliency. If the utility power goes out, it doesn't happen as often, but there are certain locations across the country. If you think about earthquakes in California, hurricanes in Florida, it actually helps to have some other source of power. There's a backup power that helps. And I think one of the things we've always figured was it needs to be a use case where resiliency highly, highly valued. And in this scenario, public transits are perfect. You have to help the citizens out, especially when there is a natural disaster happening. You absolutely want your public transit system to be operating. The resiliency is one. And I will say this is not the reason why you choose microgrid. It is more for when the microgrids actually become actually a fit, is how do you fit that into your pro forma? Many times it's very hard to fit a microgrid project into your pro forma. Generally, these are not money-making entities. Think about, you're putting solar panels across in a ground mount farm. It takes multiple acres to generate 1 megawatt of power. In an urban location, it's very, very rare in America to have less than $1 million for 2-3 acres of free land, if it exists. If not, you're trying to put them on rooftops where existing buildings are already there, but generally there aren't. In which scenario you're actually building out carports and canopies. That is a lot of foundation, a lot of concrete. Hydrogen is it could be a game changer if the actual hydrogen process itself becomes so efficient that you can get to $4 a kg. It could be a game changer as a net power producer. But I think the biggest thing also is different organizations have a different viewpoint on how microgrids can pencil in. So that would be, I would say, it's a little bit of a twist. A few developers seem to have figured it out. A few of them haven't.
In that kind of scenario, would the lack of space or the lack of profitable space to install solar or storage or anything like that, if the utility doesn't play ball or the utility just can't get the power to that site, in that case, would that kill a project? In
Totally.
that case, because there's just no way for it to move forward. So in those kind of high density areas and things like that, like a DER or a microgrid just won't be a good solution. Like that's just a deal killer at that point?
Totally. I mean, even in
Mm.
scenarios where you would have space, we've seen a lot of projects where they just can't move forward because the economics will not work. You're talking about power. I'm talking about even if you have power, the economics won't work on it. It's got to be a
Mm.
perfect triangle of scope, schedule, and cost for the project to work.
So, I mean, utilities come up all the time as far as, again, these roadblocks, these bottlenecks that, private enterprise are seeing all the time. But I think as a full soup to nuts developer and builder, I think you guys have a unique experience both in your relationship to the utility and have a different relationship in how you might navigate some of these struggles that utilities have. So, if you were to speak to your average fleet operator that might be considering a 5, 10, $15 million investment to electrify their fleet operations, knowing that, the utility is going to be a problem potentially, how does that change their relationship working with a group like you? So if they're able to, work with Mortenson, is that helpful in a sense that you've got the background and experience to help move the needle with the utilities, or is that a stuck a stuck nut no matter what?
Yeah. By the way, that's a great question, Todd. Quick clarification: we don't develop projects in a traditional way. So we would be brought in by a developer financier in this
Right.
market. We do have a development group who does who develop more hospitality and commercial work. But that's a great question. Yes, we will want to talk to the utility way ahead of time. If the queue is not there, we can certainly help them think about how can we face the project, or even help them find through matchmaking with another developer partner of ours where they may have real estate within a mile from where this facility is. Hey, can you actually go charge at an alternate facility a mile from now? So those are more creative business models than solving for the technical aspect of not having power. A great example, Todd, would be Inland Empire, just east of LA. It's so concentrated with these third-party logistics companies
Mm-hmm.
and warehouses, and you're not talking light-duty vehicles. I mean, the yard tractors could be, but you're talking heavy-duty semis, and with the regulations driven by CARB and a few others, they are forced to electrify their vehicles, and there is just not going to be enough power. Yeah, I used to joke. I'm not a technical guy at all. I used to joke we should just build a 8-story hydrogen tower to generate enough energy because there is nothing upward. But if somehow the building gets paid for, maybe somebody will be able to come up with a solution. We just suggest if there is a close by developer, let's say with a retail mall with a lot of rooftop, they could probably put 5 megawatts of solar across all of the roofs, and then they also have a lot of parking spaces. They could put chargers on the part of the building. It may not look that great, but some of the malls have not gotten the same level of foot traffic after COVID. And then also maybe carports might be easier to put up in some of these locations with the existing facilities of shade. So we are trying to help them be creative, and also we are trying to go within our own network of connecting people on who may have power that may not have a natural use. So there's always some level of an opportunity where people may have more of something versus less of something, but straight up it'll be hard if you can't get the utility to power if the facility is where you want to electrify.
It's interesting that there is a lot of kind of creative solutions and creative kind of problem solving going on here because, there used to be, or at least, just like a year ago, a lot of people would think, okay, a microgrid is you have some solar, you have some batteries, and that's a microgrid. And that's kind of what it is. But being able to solve these more corner cases is kind of where, that's popping up more and more, especially with, a lot of the companies that we talk to. The solutions that you have to kind of play around with become more and more creative as the easy stuff is done, as like the low-hanging fruit is already picked. You have to go and figure out, okay, how do we electrify everything else? This is actually the hard part. What is your kind of opinion on what would constitute a good opportunity for a microgrid? A lot of companies, like I said, the easy stuff is done, but as they're starting to look to electrify everything else, as they start getting into the harder stuff, what's a good what's a good sign that people should kind of watch out for to say, hey, this actually could be a good solution for a microgrid? What's kind of your opinion on that? Has that changed over time? What's a good thing for people to watch out for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the general, again, this is not, it doesn't apply to every situation, but generally what we say is if you want, the utility rates are important. Just a dollar per kilowatt is drastically varies across the country. So think about it, if that is higher, the panels generally are consistent. You buy them, it's the same wherever you buy. Labor is going to change definitely in terms of installation, but the utility rate is a big deal. The second is the variance of the utility rate during the day and also from season to season. The demand charges are a big deal. I'm using an anecdotal example. You could be in a part of the country where you're paying 3x if you're charging your vehicle at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And if you are running a third party logistics company, you're making already single digit margins. And guess what? You're being forced to electrify your vehicles and pay a little bit of a premium to buy those trucks. And hold on a second, you also have to own your own charging stations. And hold on a second. You see where the story is going. So if you want the same utility rate that you can plan for from an operational expense perspective, a microgrid is a great solution because you know exactly what you paid for upfront, you know what it's generally going to generate, and you know what you're going to pay for. And then the third part is, I will say, I think the space part we talked a little bit about. Is there a very efficient use of the space that you have to generate the energy? I think those three are, in my opinion, are pretty fundamental. And then, of course, resiliency is a super awesome add-on. And then, if you can have a very fortunate net metering law where you live, in terms of what you can sell back the power at, it was a little unfortunate a few months ago, or I guess a year ago, California switched from NEM 2.0 to 3.0, when the rate at which you can sell back the solar power generated at your own facility just dwindled significantly. But if you are in a location where it is actually pretty positive, we've seen situations where you can actually sell back the power at a really good rate. And in that scenario, hey, if you're not charging, you're generating excess power, you actually make money. So I think there are 3, 4, 5 scenarios where you could actually make the microgrid work. That makes sense.
Yeah. Personally, I had my own foot race to try to get in for NEM 2.0, personally for my residential solar. So I was happy to have made the cut, thankfully.
Nice.
The question, just two other broader questions too, I guess. So, as a build shop, you guys have again a very unique perspective on a lot of the problems and solutions, I think, that address the broader issues in front of us related to electrification at large. You guys are, boots on the ground, literally putting these projects in and making them work. And so, if you were to, look into your crystal ball or wave your magic wand as to what would be the easiest or best things for, our broader community to address to really advance these projects as quickly as possible, what would kind of hit list number 1, 2, and 3 of things you would change or prefer would be different?
It's the first one is going to be a little bit of a cliche. I do feel like all of the stakeholders should get inside the room and
Hmm.
come up with this is not a zero sum game. And I've been very, very fortunate to be a part of a private family business where the pillars of our success has been defined all the way from just town hall addresses all the way to how we are incentivized, as to how we help our customers, how we help our communities, and how we help our team members
Yeah.
experience. That's the Mortenson motto, is to deliver these three. And that's how we actually tell our customers how to reduce the project size so it actually pencils. We would rather build a project that would pencil rather than plan for a project that can never be built, that never pencils. I think all of the stakeholders need to come together and coming up with the solution. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is there are all kinds of innovation. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen GoGoRo. It's a Taiwanese company that puts in batteries in in a gas station format where you can come in and swap your batteries for your motorcycles in India.
Hmm.
They're just entering, and there's been a few Jiffy Lube type environments where you can take your car and then take the battery out and then put a new battery in. Obviously, you and I may not be able to do it because you may have a 8-year-old battery that's about to die, and I may have a 6-month-old battery that's brand new. But hey, if you have a fleet, if you have a fleet of similar vehicles, why not? And you can actually have a location where you already established there is power, and you have to even think about microgrids. You have the power where the transformer is right then and there, and that is just one innovation, right? So I think the part where we struggle, and having come from a lot of different industries personally, I do think this design, build, finance, operate, and maintain the DBFOM market is, fairly the value chain is not very efficient. I feel like we don't want to share a lot of information. They may charge you a little bit more if you know a lot more versus not.
Hmm.
I do think the partners that we work with have been awesome. They come in and say, "Look, this is what we need," and our engineers are inspired by identifying what the problem is, and they go all in on finding the right solution and solving it. But I think as a community, we could share a little bit more because ultimately, I think if the value chain is efficient, we can all afford to electrify the whole fleets.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So innovation, I think, is key. I love the idea of having people that are physically there on site. Builders again, the ones that know the space, know the customer, but might also have their thumb on the pulse the best about what sort of technologies might be most applicable in that particular use case. Without maybe doing that first, right? Instead of going through the entire design iteration 15 times before you find out that there's something on site that maybe would have been a better fit in the first place.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And more often than not, we just find like, why do you really need? Do you really need all of these crazy super fast chargers? And I think even charge management solutions, how they've actually come along so well on figuring this out. And then even VDG, I know it's super duper early stages. We are super excited about what V2G could look like. How to load balance these out. Again, we would love to have a microgrid project, but you know what? It needs to pencil for us. What are the alternate technologies that will make work? And we are big on VDG eventually becoming a norm. I don't know if that answered your question, Todd. So you asked for what are the three big things?
Yeah.
Everybody work together. Second is keep innovating together, and the third part is just recognize everybody's got to make money.
Mm.
It's not a zero-sum game. And I
Mm.
truly think, I'm an environmental capitalist. No economics, no environment. Of course, eventually, no environment, there's nothing. So I do think we got to be pragmatic about how everybody in the value chain needs to make money. And it's okay if one of them makes a little less money than what they may have anticipated. But in the longer run, to sustain the industry, to grow the industry, the pie is going to be humongous.
Mm.
We are just right at the cusp of the hockey stick about to hit us. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay not if you don't become a gazillionaire today. That's kind of how we've been thinking about this, right?
I was just going to say that same exact thing, that we're really on that cusp of the hockey stick where everything's really going to take off from here. And a lot of people think that we're pretty far down the road on all of these things, whether it's electrification or microgrids. I think that we're actually still relatively early on in the process because there's just so much more to learn, where a lot of even the larger projects right now are some of the more kind of obvious ones that we know, okay, you can absolutely make a lot of money on this one. This one's fairly straightforward. We could do it with the technology that we have today. But, what are these projects going to look like in 5-6 years? It's probably going to be the harder ones. It's probably going to be more complex ones that it's right, like you said, it's right on the cusp where people may or may not make as much money as they want to, or they were, today. So, sharing our experiences today on, what were the best practices, what were things that could have been done better, and not sharing that, or not holding that information ourselves, but sharing that information with everyone is not going to, it's going to help everyone. It's going to catalyze the adoption of everything because people will have paths that they didn't think about before. Like, for example, your creative thinking of, community spaces or trying to be able to share power, coming up with these different ideas might not come to everyone because they're still at the very early stages. Sharing that information is really, really important. Again, because we have a long hill to climb going from here. We need as much information out there as we possibly can get.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and it needs to happen quickly too, right? Again, kind of talking about not just the information exchange, but the approval processes, trying to cut out, innocuous cycles that just don't make a lot of sense, is going to be infinitely important just in the next less than decade, probably, right? I mean, 90% of trucking is done by small businesses with fleets of less than 5 units, and so being able to take those projects and make sure that they have the ability to access these kinds of projects and have a better understanding of how or what kind of options are at their fingertips, not just I need to talk to my utility, I'm going to install chargers because I have to because I'm in AQMD territory in South Coast. It's more of like, what are all of my different options at my disposal? What does battery storage mean for me? Do I have the space for solar? As that kind of really creative thinking and information sharing seems to be infinitely important over the next few years.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, I mean, I will say there are some awesome resources. I mean, of course, this podcast being one of many, right? I would even argue at a project level, there are, I've seen, you guys had, folks from Electrata and Forum Mobility and so forth, and I can reel off another 10, 20 names. It is amazing how organizations have been built with expertise just to drive that, right? Of course, they are in it to make money. Don't get me wrong; it's not charity. But for that management fee, you get all the expertise. You can actually focus on your business. It kind of sounds a little bit of a snake oil salesperson pitch, but at the same time, if you truly want to electrify, you still truly want to go sustainable, there is enough expertise in this market. It's been amazing how quickly this market's been able to organize around creating that expertise. It's just that the demand is so fragmented. Everybody is trying to figure out where do I even start? I think that's kind of where I feel like a lot of the inefficiency starts from.
What do you think the biggest trouble areas going forward that expertise should focus on? Because, we've been really optimistic up until this point, but again, it's a long hill to climb. What do you think those obstacles are going to be that people should start focusing their time and effort and expertise on?
I think if figuring out a way to work with the utility not just on the interconnection but also where the capacity is. Many times we start projects at locations where it's perfect because it's right by where a truck drives by, but it doesn't have any power. Maybe 250 kilowatts doesn't serve your purpose. Where we have seen success has happened so far, where things have gone from 0 to 100 or 0 to even 90, is some of our customers being super smart and diligent and coming up with locations where there is enough power, or working closely with utilities to accelerate getting power to that new site. I think that's the number one focus I would have, to make sure you have enough power. Then you can create, there are so many options there. You want two 360 kilowatt chargers? Oh, no. I want four 180 kilowatt chargers. Hold on a second. For the same 720 kilowatts, I can do eight 90 kilowatt chargers. I'm assuming there are 90 kilowatt chargers, but it's just amazing on how many products that are out there and how many configurations that we could have, both spatially and electrically, to help with the electrification. You get the power, you get everything.
Not to mention all of the advances kind of in the software realm, right? I mean, half the beauty of the microgrid is just the ability to control your own future and your own electrons and what's going where and when, which is seemingly advancing every day in every particular utility.
Totally. Yeah, totally agreed.
Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of bringing this a little bit full circle here. If you were to look into the future, a few years for Moretensen and really for the EV microgrids group in which you lead, what do you predict? What are you feeling like your team and your company and your work is going to be looking like in 3 to 5 years?
Well, I mean, in 3 to 5 years, and we actually think in the next couple of years, we are big on these are going to be pure play EV projects. We do think there have been just enough that the utilities have been able to do where there are make ready programs that have been put out. There are demand charge holidays that have been put out, and there has been, in a few instances, power that's been able to be delivered, and how the demand has not spiked crazily enough because either the vehicles are not there yet or the fleets have not made the jump yet. We do think the next couple of years are going to be generally pure play EV infrastructure projects. Think of 20, 30, 40 chargers at a facility, need to charge, 50 vehicles, 50 to 80 vehicles over the whole day. And you don't need anything else beyond maybe a small genset. Um, 2 to 5 years, we think, when the hockey stick starts going, that's kind of when people recognize, oh my God, the same location I just put 20, 30 chargers, I need actually 50 to 100 chargers more because now I'm out of my pilot phase.
Yep.
And the utilities cannot respond as quickly as they could. We do think that's when some of the microgrid projects may turn up. One thing to recognize, I mean, we do think, some of the other innovation that we were talking about, like the battery swap pieces or other developers developing, either behind the fence charging or public charging that are accessible to some of these companies. Our goal is to run 10 to 15 projects. So a little bit of an island where, we are not looking to build 50, 100 projects. So it may not be the whole, the market outlook, but from a company and a business outlook, we think, between 2025 and 2028 or 2030, there's, a big chunk of our projects are going to be the ramp up from pilot scale to a half scale electrification. And then I think 2030, it's hard to predict the future, but my gut is there is going to be some efficiencies gained. We may have hydrogen that could dominate the long distance transportation. I mean, there are concerns there. You can use the existing pipeline for hydrogen, but I'm sure there are certain locations where you can get all the resources to build an electrolyzer. There could be hydrogen for one portion of the fleets, and then you could have EV batteries based fleets. And we think the utilities may also smart up at a transmission level at that point. That's kind of what we are speculating, but we'll see.
So I'm actually really interested in these scaled projects. Is that kind of going back to one of the earlier questions of, how difficult is it to get large infrastructure projects starting to, how do you actually implement something larger than, anything that we've done at this point? Because we are going to see fleets with thousands of vehicles starting to electrify all of their depots, and they're going to have to do it in a relatively compressed amount of time. So I'm just really interested to see how we're going to be able to do that, because all of these goals, especially in California, we have goals to electrify things by 2030, by 2040, and by 2050. These projects are going to scale up very, very quickly. And to try and find the easiest path to be able to do that, not an easy path, but the easiest path, is something that there's no real question there. But just to kind of hear your thoughts on how do we start implementing these projects smoothly, effectively, again, reliably, getting them done on time, on budget, getting these projects done profitably for the next few years. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Connor. And if you think about the construction industry, and it's one of the one of the industries that haven't actually grown in terms of sophistication for a long time, right? 100 years ago, every door was put onto a door frame, one nail at a time, and we still do that same way. And one of the things we as a company have invested in, actually a couple of things that we've invested in. One is upfront design. We have generative design investments where what you're talking about, Connor, not only from a perspective of there's high ambiguity, high complexity at a project level, there are also different iterations of the same project, right? You're almost thinking about scenario planning. And then on top of that, you have all of these different resources. You have all different kinds of chargers, different types of generation sources. We intend to make many of our designs through a generative design process that will actually help clients be able to see very quickly how each of these will impact their use cases, their pro forma, how the power delivery will come through. And then the second one we've already started this in commercial construction is doing prefabbing. Right now, we have 3 manufacturing facilities in the country. We can actually put up 8 stories of hotel buildings, all just prefab in a factory setting. You have the highest quality, just the schedule savings wise, you're talking 50-60% schedule savings. Yes, it can be scaled up across every part of the country because there is freight you have to ship it to. But we find that to be an enormous asset as we think about EV charging. Tesla already does it. There was an announcement a few days ago that EVgo is beginning to do it. So one of the things that we are helping clients think about is, if you have similar programs across the country, because many times these distribution centers are also fairly similar. Sometimes there could be some minor changes, but there are scopes that could be uniform where you don't have to plan and build one site at a time. If we can take 20, 30 sites at a time and do it at a factory somewhere else, not only can you become more efficient and have the highest quality and the reliability, you also don't need to think about the spike in labor demands in a specific location. I think one of the things that we haven't really talked a whole lot about is with all of these, all of the IRA money and the infrastructure bill funds, there is a big requirement for electricians in the market, and you just don't have. One of the best bets you want to do here is actually build a university that will teach electricians or build electricians up. So I think something like this, I think, will help 3-4 different ways on getting there, and we are super pumped about. We already have engaged a couple of customers on the potential to do this, and they've been very, very good with those processes. So once that spikes up, and we truly hope to make that eventually open to the rest of the market. And why not? Let's we don't have to build everything one brick at a time and pouring one concrete skid at a time, I guess. And that is something we are super excited about.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Generative designs and prefabbing. Yeah.
Love that concept. I mean, at the end of the day, the future proofing isn't really a whole lot more than just ensuring you've got enough space to run copper through the walls. And if you can do that ahead of time without having to send electricians out and do everything post facto, or you're not retrofitting buildings, it seems like that could be an enormous concept. I feel like that's something we haven't heard much before, but it's something that should be seemingly thought about on any sort of new project development at this point, no matter what, and kind of using the core staples, the core building blocks, it seemingly could fit for all sorts of applications down the road. What's one more thing that you're really excited about? You talked about battery swapping, you talked about GoGoRo, which I've looked up since we started. It's just fascinating. Give us one more thing that you're really excited about being in the industry and an expert here.
I think the general, just thinking about, I'm a fundamentally, as you may have heard, I'm a business generalist. I'm just super pumped about how some of these trucking as a service business models, and how some of these electric rideshare companies have popped up, and what they have already done. People don't recognize is if you look at early stage public charging providers, they really struggle due to lack of utilization. Now companies have come up with a scenario where not only are we going to help a fleet with a turnkey approach of providing electric vehicle and taking care of the infrastructure, they've also created a captive utilization for their own vehicles, and making these projects to pencil a lot more. I don't have the data on what is the share of the market or share of the chargers that are utilized by their own trucks or own vehicles versus not. I'm just super pumped by some of these companies like the Zeem Solutions of the world and the Revels of the world. I don't know their financial situation completely, but just thinking about how they've been able to boldly step in and say, hey, customer, we will be completely turnkey. And at the same time, they're telling their own investors, we are creating captive utilization for our own vehicles now so that the infrastructure projects are going to pencil. There is a minimum utilization you need to have. And I think that is something that has been flipped. And I just get inspired every time I see a new way of doing business, where people are boldly stepping in and saying, yeah, we can do it a different way.
I think you, Todd, and I are pumped by the same things because we see the same thing day in, day out. We're really fortunate to be able to work with a lot of these companies and seeing the progress that they've been making and seeing what's on the roadmap over the next kind of 4 or 5 years. Hell, even the next 12 months. There's so much progress being made and so many exciting things just on the horizon that, we're getting really excited about it as well. And I think my only other question that I have is that you mentioned, you're focusing on sports stadiums. Todd and I are based in Sacramento, and we've talked about this before, but can we put in an order to get the Sacramento soccer stadium built up again? Because it's right next to work. It would be great to just walk outside and go to a game. So anything that you can do to make that happen, that would be great.
Absolutely. I will.
Hey, we'll suffice with some tickets to the A's game, which I think Moretensen's doing some work with the A's here pretty soon as well.
Yeah, in Vegas. Yes, that's right. Yep.
Yeah, very good. Well, Shankar, thank you so much for joining us in the Charge Cycle. Really appreciate it. Again, you guys are a big organization with your team specifically focused on EV and microgrids. But if you feel like there's somebody listening that might be worthwhile touching base with, how should someone get in contact with you, or what would be a good resource for people to learn a little bit more?
Yeah, you can hit me up through LinkedIn, or just my first name dot last name, Shankar.Muthukumar at Moretensen.com. And, I call ourselves a small, large company. We all know each other. Many times it's a good thing, sometimes maybe not, but we are super well connected. We are really a one big family. Yeah, just hit me up and I can connect you to the right resource.
Perfect. Okay, well, to the listener, we'll be sure to put those resources in the show notes for you. Shankar, thank you again one last time, General Manager of Mortenson. Appreciate you being on the Charge Cycle, and for everyone listening, thanks again. See you next time. Get out there, get plugged in.